Tom, to the PitchLink Sales and Marketing Litfest. I'm delighted to have you here.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this very first Sales and Marketing Litfest that's featuring authors of sales and marketing books. It's a pleasure to be with you and your audience.
Thank you, sir. Let me give a quick introduction, and then I'll let you carry on with the session. So, Thomas J. Williams co-authored The Seller's Challenge and Buyer-Centered Selling to tackle real challenges salespeople face in selling complex products. While most books talk about topics such as prospecting or cold calling, there weren't any books that specifically discuss challenges such as presenting to buying committees, RFPs, and other such specific challenges. These books aim to fill that void. The first book, The Seller's Challenge, specifically deals with the challenges that salespeople face, such as presenting to a buying committee, etc. And buyer-centered selling focuses on the buyer mentality and helps the seller to understand what problem the buyer is trying to solve. By understanding the buyer psychology, the seller is able to make better value propositions. In today's session, Tom is going to talk about buyer-centered selling. Tom, the session is all yours.
Thank you, Subjani. I appreciate that very kind introduction. I'm going to actually talk to you today about three different concepts in two of the chapters on buyer-centered selling. And to set the stage of what I hope you walk away from today at the end of the session is, I hope that as a sales rep, you'll learn let's be able to list several reasons why buyers need help to buy, explain the benefits of a collaboration plan, be able to describe the components of a collaboration plan, and then list three different types of buyer perceived risk and ways to mitigate them. My advice to you in this first concept we're going to talk about is don't assume that buyers know how to buy. Buyers often don't know how to buy for five major reasons. First and foremost, oftentimes a buyer has never bought your product or service before, so they have no experience and are unsure of how to buy within their own organization. Sometimes it's because they're buying disruptive technology that's new and it's very unfamiliar to them. Sometimes they're new to the organization and they don't really know the process, the rules, the regulations for making a purchase. Oftentimes they're undergoing a reorganization, a merger, an acquisition, and they're unsure of what they can do and they don't want to make an inadvertent mistake. And lastly, sometimes they're newly promoted, and so they've never done this before, and they don't know what they can do and cannot do within their realm of responsibility. The common denominator in all of these is the buyer is unsure of how to buy, and this is where a buyer-centered or centric sales representative can be an enormous help. So, concept number two that I want you to walk away with is collaborate with your buyer. When buyers have never bought your product or service before, they welcome help. One of the ways the sellers can help them is by introducing to them a collaboration plan. And the collaboration plan very simply guides the buyer and seller through a very complex decision-making process that without help, it would go astray. So think of this as a roadmap on how to buy. So what exactly is a collaboration plan? Think of it as a plan that is jointly developed between the sales representative and the owner of the problem or your product champion. It's a living document that answers three questions: what, who, and when. So in other words, what activities need to be done to make an intelligent, informed buying decision? Who needs to do them? And when do they need to be done by? A good collaboration plan outlines all of the milestones and the activities for a typical buying process. It defines who should be involved. It talks about how to get internal buy-in for change, a typical decision-making process, your implementation plan, and most of all, how are you going to measure that the buyer actually achieved their desired outcomes? So think of this plan as a roadmap and a guide for the buyer and seller to navigate a very complex decision-making process. Now, whether you call this a collaboration plan or something else is up to you. If you go into literature, you'll see a variety of terms called, just to describe the plan that I'm talking about. When we wrote the book several years ago, we called it a collaboration plan. Since then, I've expanded my thought process and thinking, and we now call it an outcome enablement plan. This term was actually coined by Kevin Dixon in the UK, and we embraced it. Regardless of what you call the plan, the purpose and the intent remains the same. It's a plan to help the buyer buy your product or service. Now, there are a variety of ways that a collaboration plan can be constructed. Our preference is to include the following components, but you can modify these as you see fit. First and foremost, we want to define the plan owners in the plan. And this, by the way, is usually typically a 1 to 2 page plan. Plan owners are simply the sales rep and the buyer. It could be the buyer that owns the problem you're trying to solve, or it could be your product champion. The situation appraisal is comprised of several components. Think about it as the current situation or current problem, the root cause of the problem, constraints to solve the problem, impact of the problem, and what's the desired outcome that the buyer wants to see. The third is the stakeholders that are impacted by the change or that would receive value from making a change. Every change involves some type of commitment to change, and so we want to get those commitments up front and defined up front so that everyone can agree to them. The barriers to change are the risk, and these are the risk we'll talk about in depth here in a few minutes. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about the major milestones. We want to define the time frames by individual and any deliverables that are required. Now, you can develop this collaboration plan. There's several software programs that will allow you to do that in collaboration with your buyer, or you can simply do it in a Word or Excel document or a Google equivalent. The key to developing the plan is to do it in conjunction with your buyer. Now, what are the benefits of a collaboration plan? Well, there's actually several, and I'm going to list a few here for you. There are benefits for buyers. First, it documents for them and helps them get agreement on the situation appraisal. What this does for them is immediately it gives them a document that they can circulate amongst the other stakeholders to build consensus. This is actually a problem that we want to solve. Second, it provides commitments between the buyer and seller. So there's certain things that the buyer will need to do to move the process along, and there's certain things the seller will do. It documents those commitments and tracks them. It provides a mutual to-do list so that everybody knows what needs to be done to keep the project moving along. And the reason we want to move it along is we want to define when the buyer wants to get their actual outcomes that they want delivered. Once we know what they want delivered in a time frame, then we can move backwards as to what all the activities and milestones are in order to accomplish that. And lastly, it provides a nice roadmap and for buying, and it provides ultimate transparency between both organizations. Now, the benefits for a seller are also enormous. First and foremost, it's opportunity identification. As a seller that you've got a buyer who's engaged and really wants to make a change. They're going to buy something. You may not know if they're going to buy it from you, but you know that they're going to buy something. They're going to make a change. Second thing it does is it builds trust. Between you and your buyer. You're developing a collaborative process and using a roadmap to do that. Third, which is enormous, it provides early differentiation. Think about how often that your competitors are using a collaboration plan. And I will bet you that unless you're in the selling software as a service, it's very infrequent. So immediately this differentiates you as a seller that sells different and has the buyer's best interest at heart. You're really developing the document in order to help the buyer buy the product. And last, there's virtually no buyer ghosting. So think about this for a minute. How many times have you seen a deal go dark because the stakeholder didn't respond? If you've got a collaboration plan, you can simply reach out to your contact or your champion and remind them that in order to get the outcomes that they desire within that specific timeline that's been defined, you need to get responses from X, Y, and Z. And they'll help you. Now, by now, you might be asking yourself, how do I position this collaboration plan with a first-time buyer or someone who has no experience? Well, it's actually very easy. First thing to do is just simply ask them. And you might say, John, do you mind if I ask, have you ever bought a similar product or service as this before? If they say no, then you can respond with something like this. John, it sounds like maybe we can help you. Since we've been through this buying process several times before with our clients, would you like to see the roadmap that we use to help prospective clients buy? It outlines the milestones and activities for a typical buying process. It defines who should be involved. How do we develop internal buy-in? What's a typical decision-making process? What's the implementation plan? And and how you achieve the achievement of your desired outcomes? I can share it with you, and if you want, we can even tailor it to meet your specific requirements. The plan will be beneficial to you regardless of whether you do business with us or not. When you do this, it's very hard for a buyer to turn that type of request down. Most buyers will be thrilled to collaborate and be glad and think that they're very fortunate in having a seller like you that's willing to help them. Now, if you've got an experienced buyer or a buyer that's buying a repeat buyer that's buying the same thing over and over, the plan can still be useful. It's just simply you would start with, later in the document, toward the end, you'd be more closer toward maybe the decision process, implementation, and how you're going to actually deliver the measurable results. All right, let's talk about concept number 3. How to discuss. I want to briefly discuss buyer perceived risk. Now, a risk is any uncertainty that matters to a buyer. Any uncertainty that matters to a buyer. A buyer's risk has 2 components to it. The first component is the probability that something will go wrong, and the negative consequences if it does. Buyer perceived risk derail deals. Front and center, they derail deals. Perceived risk can cause you to stop a deal to stop. It can be delayed, it can be reversed, or it can just simply go away. Think of them as handbrakes, barriers, or pinch points that must be addressed by the by the seller. Risk is perceived, and it's either perceived or real, and it varies by individual. As a seller, it really doesn't matter whether you think the risk is valid or not. It only matters that from the stakeholder's point of view, one or more of them has a perceived risk, and because of them, it's perceived and important. It must be addressed by you as a seller. Today, the elimination of risk is front and center in every buyer's mind. No one wants to make a buying mistake, and everybody wants outcome certainty. It's up to you as a seller to address and alleviate, any perceived risk that have surfaced. Now, there are 3 different levels of buyer perceived risk in terms of likelihood and probability. They're low risk, medium risk, and high risk. For example, if you're buying printer paper for your organization, the risk to your buyer is very low, or maybe even non-existent. However, if you're buying something or recommending a purchase of office furniture that affects, a number of people, then the risk may be medium, but it's still a fairly low cost initiative. Where it often becomes high risk is when you're buying manufacturing equipment, or you're buying that's multi-million dollars in cost, or maybe buying cardiac pacemakers for your hospital. Now, my advice to you is to run toward risk, not away from it. Acknowledge the elephant in the room and embrace it. Don't ignore it, don't ignore risk because it's not going to go away. One of the best ways to acknowledge risk is if you've built a collaboration plan, or if you've identified all the stakeholders, now you can go back to each of them individually and ask them what perceived risk that they see in making a buy decision or making a recommendation for a decision. And remember, it's not uncommon for different buyers to have different types of perceived risk. Now, in the book, we describe 12 different types of buyer perceived books. We don't have enough time to go through all of these today, so I'm going to pick 3 and kind of walk you through some of the elements of it. The first risk or personal risk. It occurs when a buyer or a buying team makes a purchase recommendation or purchase, and it doesn't work as expected. And as a result, they incur a potential loss that impacts them personally. When this happens, they're afraid of things like job loss, demotion, loss of remuneration, loss of credibility, loss of political capital. They'd much rather stay with the status quo than incur any of these negative consequences. No one wants to recommend a purchase that could cause business chaos, erode employee morale, or cause them reduce profits, because any of these negative outcomes can be career ending or career limiting. To mitigate personal risk, there are several things that you can do. One, an interactive demo or product trial will allow the buyer to directly interface with your product. This builds confidence and allays fears. If you've got references, testimonials, third-party endorsements, and case studies, they provide external validation because the buyers can learn from their peers what they're saying about your product before they actually, purchase it. And lastly, you can do a site visit. Sometimes site visits are done at your company headquarters, with a meeting of all your key executives. Other times, a site visit is done at a buyer's facility, where your prospective buyer can see the product in use through one of your customers. But it can be very valuable in mitigating a personal risk. Now, when you're trying to get a product, a large deal sold, one of the main concerns that senior buyers and CFOs will ask is a series of questions. In other words, they'll ask you, is there a strong business case for this product or service to be bought? Is this project tied to an organizational priority? Will it maximize productivity? What's the impact of doing nothing? Why should I believe the financial metric is achievable and believable? Are we overbuying or underbuying to achieve the outcome desired? Are there any hidden costs? Well, CFOs are going to ask these types of questions, and senior executives are going to ask these types of questions because they're financial stewards of the company's money. And CFOs in particular, are going to want to ask these questions because they've been burned before. They've signed off on projects that it never brought in the ROI or other financial metric that was desired because the users just didn't use the product. So one of the things that you think about as a CFO from a CFO perspective is they want outcome certainty because money's scarce and they want to make sure that they spend it wisely. So as a seller, one of the most valuable things that you can do is write out a series of questions that the CFO is going to ask, and then write down the answers to those and walk those questions and answers through with your product champion. So if you can't get to the CFO directly, and your product champion is going to have to do that, they know how to present your and answer these questions to the senior executive's satisfaction. Now, if you want a CFO or a senior executive to approve a high-cost item or purchase or a non-budgeted expenditure, you want to mitigate the financial risks by not only being able to answer the aforementioned questions, but also to develop a business case. Developing a business case with your champion, it can be very powerful. And what you want to do is, whether you use these components or a reasonable facsimile of them, you need to do is to build the business case with your champion. The champion has to take ownership, and when the champion presents the business case, it has to be in their words and their language to be believable. Another common risk is execution, and you've seen this many times. This risk is where can the supplier deliver the product on time? Can they deliver it within budget? And what's the training and post-purchase implementation process look like? Well, some savvy buyers really want to know the execution process before they commit to buy. It's not uncommon for them to ask about your implementation process. In other words, what has been your history of delivering on time and within budget? They also want to know about the implementation team. In other words, who will they be working with? They will ask if the sales representative is still going to be involved or if they're on to the next sale. They'll always ask about the amount, the quality, and the timing of the training that would be required. And then last but not least, they'll ask about ongoing support for customer service and for product service. So one of the ways to solve this risk is to show flawless execution with downside risk protection. Now, there's several ways you can do this. First and foremost is if you've already developed a collaboration plan or you identified all of the stakeholders, then you've already identified if there's an execution risk. Secondly is introduce your implementation team and share with them your on-time delivery data. Third is you can share customer testimonials and the results of, for example, post-implementation surveys. If you've got retention and referral data, you can share that with them. You can also, and this is a big one, and one I recommend that you do all the time, and that is discuss with them how you've overcome unexpected business problems. Buyers aren't stupid. They know that there's implementations don't always go smoothly. So talk to them about where some implementations have gone astray, and talk to them about how you've mitigated and eliminated or dealt with those particular situations. And last but not least, you can offer guarantees if your company will do that. And some examples are you can offer a money back guarantee, maybe it's an extended product warranty, maybe it's a buyback program, it could be provision of backup equipment or guaranteed service support. The whole idea here is we want to build confidence for the buyer that they can buy the product and have a confidence that you can execute. Okay, within the book, there's also a handy worksheet for you. It's called a risk assessment and mitigation worksheet. And it's just a handy worksheet where you can develop a list of risks, take a look at all the risks and determine by stakeholder who has what risk, define whether it's high, medium, or low, and also what your mitigation strategy is. Now, if I've done my job, you should be able to answer each of these questions that we talked about as learning outcomes at the beginning of the session. As we conclude today's session, if you decide to buy the book, you can go to our website or you can contact me via email and receive a complimentary workbook that'll walk you through a series of exercises on each chapter. There's also a series of concept cards that cover most of the chapters. And if you also go to the website, you can download an ebook on our outcome enablement plan, which is really the collaboration plan. I always enjoy being able to stay in contact with people. So if you'd like to contact me or learn a little bit more about our organization, here's some information for you to do so. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. That was very nice, very in-depth. So, guys who are here, you can see a resource icon next to the chat, and if you click on that, you can download this deck that Tom just used. It will have all these details for you. Incidentally, Tom mentioned Kevin Dixon, and Kevin and I have been talking about how outcome enablement is actually what it should be, neither sales nor buyer, because both are sort of one-sided. Outcome enablement is what is actually a two-sided view, which essentially end of it should be really one side. I mean, all the buyer and the vendor needs to be on the same side. Otherwise, we are sort of at some point working in conflict. If we cannot align our interests, then there'll be conflicts and frictions remaining, which is what will impact selling and buying. I think Tom will be able to explain that better, but yes, outcome enablement is what it is about, and it's not about buyer or seller enablement. Tom, thank you. Lovely session, and I really enjoyed going through it. It was like what we wanted. It was short and dense, so people can have a lot of time to think about what you said. It's definitely not a 20-minute job. Any questions?
What value can a seller add when there's an RFP and the requirements seem to be set in stone? Well, that's a great question. Um, there's also, well, it got me thinking now of where we did a chapter on RFPs. I think it's in the Seller's Challenge, the first book. But there are different types of RFPs, and we outline like the different types in there. So one of the first things to do is to find out whether it's a real RFP. In other words, has it been written in a fair and equitable way, or is it been written by one of your competitors, or has it been written in a way that the procurement or other people have reached out to suppliers in advance because they have to do an RFP. A lot of government organizations, things like that, have to do it. So one of the things you can do is respond to the RFP, and if they allow you to ask additional or provide additional information, do that. Or you can politely decline to respond to the RFP because they, in your opinion, they're missing key value points that that you think you should be articulated. And also, if you've done, the best way to do this, of course, always is get ahead of the RFP. And if you know the company is going to have to do this or is thinking about an RFP, initiate contact with stakeholders well in advance. Rahib, if there's a follow-up to that, I'll be happy to answer it. Or if you want to go ahead and send me an email, we can set up even a Zoom call and talk through it. And I'll even share with you what we have in the book. How to handle the other lack of motivation to change. Yeah, this is something we didn't cover in this topic, but we did cover it in the book where we talk about how to create insights or bring perspective that cause people to think differently. Because we really got to get people. If you think about change, we've got to get people to go through a series where they're not interested at all to acknowledging that they need to do something different. Or even investigate looking at something different. So they walk through a series of steps. I can also walk you through that if you want to on a call. Any other questions, Substandard?
Yeah. I think one is coming up.
Okay. These are great questions. What comprises an effective selling team that is buyer-centric across departments? Boy, this starts with this. This is a great question. This starts with the CEO, and it's got to be not just so we say we're customer-centric, but every department, every employee needs to actually be customer-centric. So what I mean by that is when you've got customers that are on hold for extended periods of time, when you got somebody from finance, demanding payment, those are not buyer-centric activities. And so what you really need to do is to have a series of people that are really centered around and understand how does the buyer buy? What is the buyer decision process? What are those series of steps that they walk through and kind of follow the process that I outline in the collaboration plan or that's in the book to really be buyer-centric. It's more than just putting it on a piece of paper that we're buyer-centric. You've actually got to demonstrate it on a day-to-day basis. And for example, is the CEO, do they ever make sales calls? Or does the executive team ever make sales calls? So there's a lot that goes into this, but it starts with the strategy at the top, and it also starts with the bottom up, where people are offering suggestions to the management team. How do we become more customer or buyer centric?
Yeah, I think this is absolutely critical because everybody thinks that saying that the organization is buyer centric is good enough, but you don't actually do much about being buyer centric. Tom, I have one question in case there is something else coming up. I don't know, but I have one quick question. That is, okay, I lost it. Sorry. I'll come back. I'll come back
Well,
to you.
as you're thinking
Yeah.
about,
So no,
As you're
Yeah,
thinking about it, going
yeah,
back to the last gentleman's question, about building a seller's team.
yeah.
One of the most common. It's really a great question and a really important thing to do. Every time I've taught managing large accounts, I was brought into the organization because they lost a major account, and that's sad because there needs to be a program in advance so you don't lose accounts, you don't have customer churn, right? And so the question that gentleman's asking is extremely, extremely important about how do you create a cross-functional selling team that is really buyer centric and that emanates and resonates with the executive team so that everybody's on the same page that we're here to satisfy customers. If we satisfy customers, the end result is we'll get sales and we'll get profit.
Right. So the question I was about to ask you was, see, we talk about this building a collaborative uh, model to go forward. How do we actually, how does that happen? How does the buyer think that it is worthwhile investing time with this vendor to build a collaborative plan? Am I
Well,
making sense?
when you present it, I think if you present it in the way I did or in a reasonable
Hmm.
facsimile of that, what you end up doing is if you're my buyer and I'm sharing with you a document, you look at this and say, wow, this is pretty comprehensive. This has got a lot of milestones I hadn't thought about. A lot of it,
Ah,
you listed some sub activities. And so it starts to generate interest. And they say, I need to get John involved. I need to get Jim involved. You start saying, well, what departments are they in? Right. And then you start to ask yourself, because you've done this so many times with so many clients and in so many industries, now I can sit there and say, so Chan, what about getting engineering? Would engineering be important in here? Should they be involved? Should IT be involved? So maybe I
hmm,
prompt you a little bit to bring in other people that I know from experience are going to be involved, you know, uh,
right.
or do you wait until the very end and say, well, I hope that they don't surface, right? Like
Hmm,
procurement, for example. Many people don't want to include procurement. When they've been taught by their sales director, don't include procurement unless we absolutely have to. Let's sell it to the champion and let them give it to procurement. Well, procurement's going to come in at some point. And
absolutely.
why make them an enemy, right? Bring them in early,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Identify that. So that's the advantage of kind of do this whole process in a collaborative way. And when you're doing that,
absolutely.
you're selling totally different. You're not focused on a product. You're not focused, on your needs. Everything is around the buyer and what do they need in order to make an informed, intelligent decision. And the beauty of the plan, like I think I hope I mentioned it, is the plan works even if you don't buy from me. In other words, you might say to me, I might say to you, or you might say to me at a certain point in the plan, I don't think you're a good fit. Or I don't think we're a good fit. The plan is still there for you to use with whoever vendor you want to use with. That's going to keep you in the back of that buyer's mind. I want to do business with Tom in the
Yeah,
future.
absolutely. I totally agree. And I have some ideas which I'll circle back and discuss with you on
Okay.
this, but slightly different. But I
Okay.
have some thoughts I want to pick your brains on. Tom,
Well,
thank you so much. This was lovely. Yeah.
I always enjoy our conversation. So anytime.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for coming on. I know we did struggle a bit about with our back and forth, but we managed somehow, right?
We did. We
This
did.
was
It was
good.
my pleasure. Thank you
This
for the
was
invitation.
Thank you, thank you. The last session coming up with Todd Caponi, it will be a recorded session, but it's coming up in a bit.